Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, July the 16th, the day Keir Starmer faces questions about an extraordinary set of blunders, secrecy and cover-up by the Whitehall machine and ministers in two governments that's come to light in the last 24 hours. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know for the day ahead in British politics in 20 minutes, or at least as much as we're allowed, after it emerged that the British government has been using a super injunction to prevent reporting of an epochal and embarrassing blunder by an MOD official, and then held that gagging order in place for a couple of years, long after the public interest case had disappeared.
What we're referring to, if you haven't seen it, is the stunning tale of how, in 2022, a British soldier emailed a spreadsheet containing the personal details of up to 100,000 Afghans who'd been helping Britain and their details of their families to people in Afghanistan, and then the details leaked onto Facebook, putting each one at risk from the Taliban, effectively putting them on a Taliban kill list for helping Britain.
So, as these details started to seep out, the Ministry of Defence in 2023, under the last government, therefore, applied a particularly strong form of super injunction, a legal instrument which we more usually associate with celebrities or businessmen with something to hide, Sam, to force them to keep it secret, not only what had happened, but also the existence of the injunction, which is what a super injunction is. And the defense of the use of this was to limit the risk to those on this list who'd helped British forces in Afghanistan without alerting the Taliban, who might well extract lethal reprisals. But that then did lead to a situation in which unmarked planes were bringing thousands of Afghan citizens into Britain with no accountability, no parliamentary debate, and of course making sure that it was not on the agenda at the last election. And that this has continued, or at least that the injunction has continued, way beyond that point.
Now, initially, the government said that, as you say, the secrecy order was in place because they wanted to help the Afghans named in the spreadsheet and keep them safe and to extract them from the country and bring them to the UK. But over time, it became clear that only a fraction of the 100,000 or so at risk would ever be brought here. And in the end, it seems that only 24,000 Afghans have or will be brought to the UK. Now, just that alone has cost certainly earmarked for this was £7 billion. That was the size of the scheme that was never disclosed to Parliament. But even that only was to deal with a fraction of the problem. And it seems that ministers and officials just wanted to keep so much of this out of the public eye for as long as possible.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there's so many ramifications of this and angles we can get into it, and which will unfold in the coming days and weeks, Sam. But it really is that dedication to secrecy, which seems to trump all other considerations here, let alone democratic ones and what people have got the right to know. So we have Ben Wallace, the former Tory Defence Secretary, writing in The Telegraph, saying it is childish. Today, he says, to attack the previous government for this. His duty was to keep those Afghans safe who'd worked with the British authorities in and around and after the war in Afghanistan. But at the same time, as you point out, only about a quarter of them were in the end resettled in this country. So clearly some sort of logic changed. Now, speaking to MOD officials overnight, I heard that there was one argument that actually the risk turned out to be less than they thought. People could be dispersed, or that they didn't assess the risk to be so high going forward from the Taliban, but you had to err on the side of safety on that. But it does feel a bit that also, as you got closer to this becoming any danger of becoming public, there was just a desire not to have it discussed at all. However many people were going to come to the UK or not to come to the UK, and perhaps a suggestion too that sensitivities about asylum and immigration across the parties might have, shall we say, played a role in that risk assessment.
There are so many different sort of things that make your eyes pop about this story. One of which is that the judge presiding over the secret court that had to be updated about whether or not the superinjunction should stay in place, even the judge themselves seemed completely shocked at the route that the government was going down. So there's quite a lot of kudos this morning to Mr. Justice Chamberlain, who appears to have been a critic of the secrecy and the lack of accountability for this huge blunder and the massive secret resettlement scheme that it triggered. In the judgment that he handed down, that was made public at midday yesterday, he talked about the long-running and unprecedented secrecy order. And I do think that the fact that officials have broken glass on superinjunctions over a matter of public policy is just a massive Rubicon that's been crossed. So he talked about the unprecedented secrecy order. So it was the first time this had been used in this way. He talked about the whole episode giving rise to serious free speech concerns that left a scrutiny vacuum. And he said that the gagging order had the effect of, quote, completely shutting down the ordinary mechanisms of accountability which operate in a democracy. So good morning to Wednesday morning colleagues, as they say. That's the gathering of permanent secretaries who get together on a Wednesday morning, for which I think is you that has the spotlight on you this morning as to exactly why you advise ministers to go down this route and whether or not you shouldn't have been a bit more accountable. So maybe we'll hear a little bit more from your meetings in the coming days and weeks. But the kind of secrecy that you enjoy maybe is part of the problem. I don't know. But I think this is going to be something that's chewed over for certainly in Prime Minister's questions at midday. Just how exactly did it take place?
I liked your j'accuse there to the entire top of the civil service, some codes. I think it's a very good point, just as we move on to the politicians here in the spotlight and the firing line on these. Yes, these decisions are made largely by and with very senior civil servants as well, and they have a case to answer here, as the entire functioning or dysfunctioning apparatus of the MOD. And of course, the heat then rises on the political class too. Keir Starmer in the Commons at midday for PMQs, who will, of course, be asked straight away about the data breach. We don't even really know how it took place. I mean, there's clearly a massive malfunction that was able to happen. And why, as John Healey confirmed yesterday, did nobody lose their job over this? The official, believed to be a soldier, has been redeployed. We don't know much about that. I mean, I always have in these situations some bad squeak of sympathy for people who've, just by one keystroke, which should never have been possible, right? This person made a terrible mistake, but has found themselves carrying so much kind of moral responsibility. But systemically, that should not have been possible. So it's not really just their fault. I think I'm just really interested as well. The previous government, Conservatives, have heard that staunch defence from Ben Wallace. Lots of people behind the scenes casting some doubt on that. Not that he doesn't mean that people needed to be defended, and I absolutely know that, knowing Afghan family who got out to the US with the help of the State Department, how urgent it did appear and was for many people to get people out who'd helped the Americans or helped us. Where literally this family Sambad were given a warning that the Taliban knew where they were, and two of them taken to the airport straight away. 3 of them secretly got out afterwards. Were never able to go back to their home again. Didn't collect anything. Arrived in so that is there is that angle, and we shouldn't forget that. The trouble with this case, it seems, is that very strong case does not seem to be the one that's been defended over 2 years, over 2 governments. There does seem then to be a question at any point. Did John Healey, did his predecessors, Conservative defence secretaries and prime ministers say, this has gone on long enough, and we've reached a point, we've done what we can, now we need to go public? As the judge pointed out, that didn't seem to be their default mode at all. It was, how long can we keep it secret until some journalists find out about it and make a massive push, an inexpensive push, to take on the government legally?
That's right. Look, I think there's one argument at which the government case completely falls apart, and it looks like this. Yesterday, when this order was lifted, ministers, John Healey, said that they were lifting the order on the basis of a risk review that had concluded that the Taliban either had the information that was leaked themselves or was unlikely to target the subjects of that leak, right? And because of that risk review revealing that, it was all fine to go public with this and drop the superinjunction. But, as we know, not least from Lewis Goodall on the news agent, who was in the forefront of of a lot of this. Those were the arguments being made in the secret court for months. For months. You literally had the judge appealing to journalists to try and get evidence of exactly that the Taliban probably already knew and that the risk was actually low in order to lift the secrecy. But because of the superinjunction, they couldn't do any reporting on it because they couldn't talk to anybody. So actually, all that has happened is that officials have come up with a 180-degree change of approach and use that to justify it going public. But that could have been the case, and the suspicion was that was the case much, much earlier. So the question, Anne, is what role did politics play? And I do mean grubby, personal, institution, and even election politics. You know, you pointed out the danger that Afghan families were in, and the journalists involved at the start completely accepted without question the MOD case that you needed not to report this in the first instance because people's lives might be in danger. You know, journalists, for the most part, are not inhuman and are not insensitive to that. But the question is, at what point did actually the reality become that Rishi Sunak's government just didn't want a story about billions of pounds being spent on Afghan asylum seekers spilling into the public domain months before a general election? And for this government, could John Healey and the top team at Labour not have acted sooner rather than putting it in the too hard to handle box for basically a whole year? My worry is, Anne, is that institutions like the top of Whitehall just simply have a knee-jerk response to difficult questions to basically cover it up and make it secret. And now I think it's on ministers and top officials to explain why they, in my view, probably undermined the rule of law by reaching for unusual legal instruments to keep the whole thing secret for so long, you know, on the verge of abusing their position over time, while pretending to help people that they were actually leaving to rot in Afghanistan.
Yes, I mean, as you as you know, I sometimes see some things a bit differently, particularly when I think back to, you know, to my background in covering conflicts and when you say that when it became clear that there was no risk. I mean, there's not a sort of day in which the Taliban are not a risk to people who have helped, as they see it, occupying forces. The risk assessment can change. The risk might still well be true. And I think the other front that you can see open up here, I think it's mentioned in some of the reporting this morning, is a sizable number of those Afghan families who suddenly found out that they because they had helped the British military, that they were perceived to be in risk of their lives, will also be intending to sue the MOD as well. I mean, this is not going to stop quickly with a couple of committee hearings. So I suppose I do think that there would have been a genuine argument inside the MOD and at the highest levels of government and the civil servants you have in your frame a bit earlier, to say, well, how do we assess this risk? You know, how do we assess it vis-a-vis what we know from our American colleagues who are also there in the security services about how we see that risk? It's not as clear as saying, well, there was a risk then and there wasn't a risk now. But what has changed is the assessment, if you like, of the political risk in the UK and the desire by two parties, as you point out. And I'm still yet, we're going to hear from John Healey more this morning on the broadcast round, a bit unclear if John Healey says that he was uncomfortable with this. You know, Labour did come in, they had the playing field was open to them to say, look, this thing happened under the Tories, we're going to take an entirely different view. I think we need to know why they didn't, and if it was really only about risk analysis, why was it also then the case, as a Politico Playbook pointing out this morning, essential and justified is the language being used by the government, but John Healey is reiterating it's the end of the road for what he described as a secret resettlement route. So you have government sometimes saying one thing about that risk to people, that the other side will saying, hey, this is not a good way to do things. There won't be any more unmarked planes with Afghans arriving in Britain. When do these decisions get made? That will be the question.
John Healey, in the first set of interviews, the one with the news agents yesterday, was making the case there'd been a kind of multi-part review inside government about this. But it all sounded quite like it fairly sort of languid and not particularly speedy from the way he was describing it. Look, you talk about how difficult these decisions are and how there is, you know, public interest tests and all the rest of it. I would urge people to read the account in the Times by the utterly brilliant Larissa Brown, that actually talks about the MOD politics about all of this. Which, I mean, from Larissa's account, and she is a absolutely first-rate journalist, I have no reason to doubt. She talks about how the spooks effectively traced the leak to a regular soldier. Look, I agree with you. Like, I do actually have a smidgen of sympathy. What they were trying to do, this soldier who worked for Regent's Park Barracks, which is where the UK Special Forces have their HQ, was trying to do is work out whether people who had applied for a resettlement scheme were genuine. And they did this by emailing a couple of times the people in Afghanistan with the spreadsheet to ask, who are these people? Are they the right people to be given resettlement in the UK? That's how it happened, right? And it all came out when somebody posted on a Facebook group for people seeking resettlement that they had the whole database, and I wanted to disclose it. But when this came out, it seems like there was just a massive Whitehall row. There was a discussion in one of the meetings about whether somebody'd have to resign, whether that be Gwyn Jenkins, the director of Special Forces, or even Tony Radakin, the chief of the Defence Staff. And the answer came back resolutely not. And here's the bit where I think the politics comes into play. According to Larissa, the MOD just kept saying the whole thing won't be an issue. A government insider told the Times. The tone from the MOD was that the people on the list would never really have qualified in the first place. So who gives a S star star star? And when Afghans turned out to have found out about the email breach, what the UK state was to put them on a plane and fly them to London as quickly as possible to effectively buy their secrecy. So grubby from top to bottom to keep it quiet, or all in tandem with an electoral timetable that would have meant up to Rishi Sunak, and he's the person I really want to hear from, that it just was so convenient this didn't come out for him either.
Well, indeed, and sort of just a side point from me, but I've been just writing on and off about the many travails of the BBC at the moment. The Culture Secretary, Lisa and Andy, calling weekly for the heads of broadcasters and who's going to be sacked. I mean, talk about the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing, while a major government department has had such a malfunction. I think it really does call for a complete culture change at the MOD. I know there are many others involved, and you're quite right to point out that we need to hear from Rishi Sunak, as well as putting the heat on John Healey, the Prime Minister in the present government. Everybody knows that the MOD, obviously it needs confidentiality on many things. Everyone knows that there's a terrible culture of secrecy and lack of engagement, and in this case, a desire to block the truth. And I think that really should be something that is, if comes out of this, is a root and branch reform of the Ministry of Defence.
Just put one more person in the frame. That's Simon Case, the former cabinet secretary. All of this will have gone through him. He, of course, worked in the intelligence agencies himself. Rachel Reeves had her big moment in the Mansion House, and this morning, investors and policymakers and bankers and all the rest of it are sort of drawing breath. She talked in her speech about the need to basically reduce regulation in order to boost growth. Now, Anne, I don't think I've ever heard a chancellor at a Mansion House speech not talk about the need to reduce red tape in order to boost growth. What was the case in favour of the Mansion House speech?
Oh, you old cynic. Imagine you probably covered a few, so we'll grant you that. Veteran status in Mansion House speeches. Well, you're right about that, but the case that Rachel Reeves was making, I think, was quite interesting in that here is someone who came into this role from that background, her own economic background and knowledge of the city and savings and mortgages in particular in her professional backpack. Rachel Reeves argued, as many did after the great financial crisis, that we needed a much more kind of security built in. The market people shouldn't take unnecessary risks, and it should be very clear that what risks they were taking if they invested. That also stymies the ability of financial advisors to make direct recommendations with it, which are not so hedged around with a lot of warnings. Now, explicitly, she tells this audience last night of investors and powerful finance people that this has gone too far. We must roll back regulation, which has gone too far in seeking to eliminate risk, which were also the risks that Rachel Reeves and others were very keen to eliminate after the financial crisis. It's bad for business, it's bad for growth, it's bad for working people. Now, it's not so much, I think, that she just wants to undo red tape here. It's a complete shift to saying we need to try to get people not to be putting things just into a safe and secure savings account. We need a kind of tell Sid campaign, if you go back to that Thatcher era campaign, to get people into the stock market. It's almost like she was kind of working for the stock market, and you've got to get in, you've got to get in there, and we've got to stop you being so scared of it. There's still the question that risk does exist, and how is that going to then be balanced? But it also shows that she really thinks there is just not enough money going into investment in the UK. Where can you get it? If you can't get others to do it, why don't you ask Brits to invest in their own economy? Will that be successful? I don't know, but for me, it was like a big change of tone.
So if she is serious about incentivizing people to save in the stock market, to invest in stocks and shares, you sort of have to disincentivize people from using more traditional saving schemes. And if she's going to do that, that's a massive row on her hands. Another one for the October-November budget. For me, the Mansion House was the second biggest economic event of yesterday. The first and most important one was Richard Hughes, head of the Office of Budget Responsibility, who talked about having reasons to worry because of the sheer scale of Britain's debt level, and saying that we cannot afford the array of promises that politicians have made to the public, not just Rachel Reeves, her predecessors as well, but the lack of wiggle room, the inability really of us to maneuver and operate at the moment because debt levels are so high, and the fact that he said that ever higher and higher levels of tax are not good for growth, causing sort of warning her as she prepares to maybe increase taxes by up to 20 billion in the autumn budget, suggests that we're on for a very painful path. Let's see what Rachel Reeves actually does. I am always more skeptical than you about changes of tone. I just like to see the colour of their money. Sorry.
Well, does she intend then to really squeeze savers and things like ISAs? There's mixed messages on that. Some people say she's backed off that, or just encourage us. And that's very strange, isn't it? The idea that the government's sort of encouraging you to sort of go home tonight, Sam Coates, sit down with the missus and say, what I've got to do is do something like a lot more risky, but that will be good for the UK economy. Can she really make that happen, whether by tone or whether by squeezing us out of our tried and trusted savings habits? Let's see.
Two announcements. First of all, the 20-minute alarm is up. Secondly, I would never, ever, ever call my other half my missus.
I have made a terrible blunder.
I will see if she forgives you. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. We will be back for Thursday's Politics at Sam and Anne's, ahead of next week's final couple on Monday and Tuesday before recess. Don't forget, we've got a box set coming that should get you up to date before everyone comes back in September. But have a lovely evening, and we will see you tomorrow.
See you in the morning.